Welcome to the Expert Series from Selling Your Canadian Business. Our book lays out the expert team of advisors every Canadian business owner needs in their corner. This series brings those experts into the conversation, one at a time. Disclaimer: this series is for educational purposes only and is not professional advice. Always consult qualified professionals. Find our book and more resources at sellingyourcanadianbusiness.ca. Here is your host.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Prowse from the Shaughnessy Group, and this is another episode of the Expert Interview Series. This is our opportunity to interview the experts who help business owners grow and eventually exit their business. Today's guest is Luisa de Jesus, who is a fractional human resources professional and president of LD Human Resources, and is also a member of the Falcon Group. Luisa, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, David.
Great. Well, so tell us who you are and how you got to doing what you're doing.
Sure. So I've been in HR for over 30 years. Yes, I'm dating myself, but through my journey, prior to opening my firm, I was working at a small, medium-sized accounting firm who worked with owner-managed businesses. And I recognized that there was an opportunity where people needed support. So essentially, they don't know what they don't know. And it's an area that is second nature to me. So the partners would come by and, say, Luisa, can you help this person? Someone is going on mat leave or they need a support with this employee matter. And I quickly recognized there was an opportunity and a need. I'm also a very big mental health proponent, and we spend more time at work than we do at home. And that shapes how we see our day going, our emotions, our mental well-being, and bringing that home. And so I felt that if I could educate and support and something that's easy to me, take that off the owner's plate, or, make it simple, and support them through these challenges that, they understand their business and are experts in their business, then perhaps that could trickle down a little bit to, excellent leadership and having, our neighbors, our friends come home working for 80% of Canadian economy at small business, having them come home and have a better mental well-being. So in our business, we really partner with organizations to build stronger workplaces through leadership development, strategic human resources, org design, and compliance is a big one as well, and very important to ensure that's compliance is in place so that best practices, right?
Yes.
And as I mentioned, it's always been sort of supporting businesses, support people, challenges. So being proactive from a business problem perspective so that we can, create clear opportunities for decisions and influence business performance. So your people are your most valuable asset, and it's really important to focus on that so that you see that hit the bottom line as well, and everyone is going home happy in that sense. And so we want to have those scalable people practices that support the growth that the business is looking to, improve or grow in that sense, and also maybe creating an opportunity where business doesn't just thrive on one person. A lot of the times it bottlenecks or few critical people, where we've got a systematic approach where everyone is balanced and there's harmony and such.
Yeah, excellent. So if you got a business owner who's 3 to 5 years away from a business exit, why should HR be part of their exit planning process?
As I mentioned, your people are your most valuable asset. So, when owners spend years oftentimes preparing sort of financials and, but they do overlook that value of the people where, a buyer's not simply just buying revenue, they're buying the ability for that revenue to continue. And that's through your people. And so a lot of the times I find, we need to look at accountability factors, and do employees have that accountability? They've got that institutional knowledge of, it's not just with the owner, because once the owner steps out, the machine needs to continue going and building revenue. And so we really need to ensure that we've got effective leadership capabilities, policies, and practices that are consistent, so that the buyer doesn't see risk there. because there is risk essentially if those things are not in place. And so what we do from an HR perspective and why it's important to have HR as part of the planning conversation is we're identifying those gaps. We're identifying those risks so that we can close them, establish leadership structures, documentation systems, processes, policies, whether it's compensation practices or performance management, really having those pieces in place that then gives the buyer confidence that the business is going to continue to operate. And it also will maximize the value of that business for that owner that's stepping away.
Yeah. And we often talk about professionalizing the business as part of the planning process. So what does that mean from an HR perspective in your mind?
Yeah, I like that word, professionalizing the business. I think it makes everyone's life easier, creates clarity in terms of roles and responsibilities. What's the practice? What's the process? I find when we work with businesses, some of them have been in business for 20 years and they don't have structure or systems and process. Others know that, okay, I want to set this up because I want to scale. So as a startup, this is what I need to do to scale. And so really having that foundation of best practice, not just how we've always done things, if you will. We want to create some clear processes, clear roles and responsibilities, understand, we call them expectations, objectives, what some people call them KPIs, right? Like, how do we do what we do? And that's not just in the HR space. I would say every aspect of your business should have almost like a manual of what's the process, who does what are the risks, what are the impacts, So a lot of the times businesses will outgrow informal practices. So like I said, business owners are experts in their field, not necessarily on practices, processes. Like for myself, I'm a business owner. I'm not an expert in marketing. I'm not an expert in finance. I lean on my fractional experts and consultants to support me. I'm not big enough that I need an in-house person, but I don't know what I don't know. So I want to make sure that I can have those things in place so that I can get the value, and people are your most valuable asset, as I mentioned. So, having those practices that are informal, some of them work. We just have to refine and tweak them. Others, your business evolves just like your iPhone doesn't work anymore. We need to adapt to the changing business world that we're in and make sure that, we have those in place. And this is going to help the buyers because professionalizing a business or, having a business professional with standards and practices, it's easier to scale. Buyers have confidence because things are already in place. It's like when you're going to buy a home, instead of having a house that you need to gut and redo, oh, it's like turnkey ready, right? So this is going to be much more attractive.
Yeah. And I think it's probably an area that a lot of business owners probably underestimate what needs to be done when they're, maybe if you're like 5 years away from a potential exit and they've always kind of run their business in a certain way. And, it depends on maybe how many employees they have. They might have sort of gotten away with being a little loose. But, as you move towards a potential exit, that whole professionalization process, I think, is important because in getting the documentation down is because, you're moving from an area where, you've been running that business for a while to now you're going to potentially, hopefully hand that off to somebody else. So I think that whole professionalization process is pretty critical.
It's very key. Absolutely. And it's a record of, institutional knowledge as well, right? In terms of, how do we deal with, like I said, not just in HR, but but from an HR perspective, what do we do for salary increases? How often what is a commission plan, for example, for your salespeople? Is there a profit share? Like, how do you retain your staff? It's all these culture pieces of why people want to continue to work there and grow and build, because you want that to stay there, even if the founder steps out of the business, right? And that should be something that is happening in every aspect to document that institutional knowledge of how you do things, also how you do things with your clients, right? That's, I would say, one of the pieces, like when you have a new person that's working in an organization, whether it's at the founder level, at the team member level, your client is now having to kind of build that rapport all over again. So if you have things that are documented that makes it easier to close those gaps, then you're halfway through continuing that relationship and making it more successful, right? And that's no different for employees. So if a founder understands the history of an employee, a buyer understands that, then they're going to build that rapport and continue to have a successful relationship with them to have that hit their bottom line, like through their people, right?
Yeah. So, and we know lots of businesses are highly dependent on their owner or their founder. So, from your perspective, how can you help an owner help their business become less dependent on them?
Yeah, and I think that's the bottleneck there, right? A lot of the times business owners are looking to retire or sell their business or step out for this very purpose because they've they're tired. They've
Hmm.
been the person that have been, relied on and running this operation for so long. But it's so important to not have that dependency. Like I think sometimes business owners may have longevity in their business if they had more opportunity to not be so dependent on, right?
Yeah.
And if you're able to demonstrate that for a period of time and then decide to sell, well, then you're probably going to be much more valuable because you've had a proof of concept where the business is running without you.
Yeah.
And so, they're often very dependent on because they're usually the decision maker for everything. So
Yeah.
the objectives really kind of shift that knowledge throughout the organization, setting up, clearly defined roles, having a really strong leadership team, having documented processes. And a lot of the times it's an emotional aspect that should start before the sale aspect of letting go of that responsibility, having decision making authority within the organization and accountability, commencing a succession plan for your right left
Yes.
hands,
Yes.
right? And having job descriptions and levels of ownership defined, right? So
Hmm.
that reduces that bottleneck, allows the business owner to step away, so that, as I mentioned, if that continues, it's letting go without losing control, and then they're really set up for success when they're going to sell the business. I call this, it's not a very very kind concept, but it's called like replaceable leadership, because
Yeah.
even those leaders that you set up, we should have right and left hands for those people,
Yeah.
right? So, or at least I say when we look at succession planning, okay, can this business, so who can maybe support in the interim when someone goes on
Hmm.
vacation, who's your person, right?
Yeah.
So that you're not coming back to sort of so much work. Or what's the alternative if we don't have that resource internally? What's the alternative that we can utilize support externally? I was mentioning to you, like, marketing is not, we have someone internally, but before we had someone internally that helped us with this, well, we used an agency. So, like, you need to think about these backup plans. But when you're looking at specific dependency on a owner, you need to set that up way in
Yeah.
advance. And I would say that why I say way in advance is because it's really that comfort level of trust and dependency that and it's training, it's a relationship. You have to build that over time. It doesn't just happen overnight. As I mentioned, I'm a business owner myself. Like,
Yeah.
I've worked with many team members, and having that confidence for them to understand what your vision is, how your approach is, why you're successful in terms of what you're
Hmm.
doing, that takes time. They have to shadow that. They have to demonstrate those skill sets. You're hiring for that, but
Yeah.
then before you can say, okay, now this is your baby, you need to also be able to be there to coach them. So, why that start early is because if an owner decides to do that like 6 months before they leave or 2 months before they leave, well, where's the guidance, the confidence building for that individual? How do you know for sure when problems come up, they're going to handle it, with confidence or effectively? You need to be there as a backup, right?
Yeah.
So it's a skill, but it's like any other muscle building. Like, it takes time, right?
Sure. No, takes a lot of planning. So, what are the common reasons or the triggers in a business that's going to have a business owner reach out to you as a fractional HR person?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of the times because something has gone terribly wrong. They've got to do an investigation, or they're trying to prevent some sort of huge loss, because it's affecting their bottom line, or it's creating toxicity or problems within their workplace to be able to operate as effectively as possible. And it's gotten to a point where, okay, we're out of solutions and options here. And so, difficult employee situations or leadership struggles, or like I said, maybe they're getting sued. Sometimes they've had rapid growth and now they haven't had time to kind of create these things in place, but they've just been managing, and now they have a lull that they need to set this up. They know what has to be done, but they need support to kind of get that to continue to scale. So, usually the owners involved, and they have, they've delayed these difficult situations, and so they've come to us at the last resort. But our approach is we've got I guess there's two different ways that we work with our clients. We can be fixers where, we're dealing with the problem at hand, we're resolving the issues and putting sort of recommendations and best practices in place so that you can have long-term success. Or we're working with clients as their partner in creating that long-term success by, identifying gaps, creating structure, processes, building coaching with their leaders, building sort of that long-term confidence and support with their team members, because we're their in-house HR person, essentially, just on a fractional basis. So, but a lot of the times people come to us essentially because there's a problem and they need to fix it right away.
Yeah.
And then, we want to sort of identify and put those things in place, especially if they're looking for a sale. Like if they're going to, look to sell the business, well, no one's going to want to buy a problem, right?
Yeah.
Even if they're under the radar, that, like, I always find like everything comes out in the laundry when when buyers are doing their due diligence, they're going to look at the details, right? So it's really, really important to have those pieces at least on their way to resolution, right?
Yeah. And I think, what's good is that the whole universe of like fractional professionals, I think, is certainly in Canada become more well known. Like I think 15 to 20 years ago, they either didn't exist or no one knew they existed. And I think it's a great resource for businesses, especially like, in the lower middle market. If you've got, I'd imagine 15 to 20 plus employees, like where some of the issues start to crop up, we're having a fractional HR person around to help you out with some of those matters. Can help you because you still have a budget, so you don't have enough money to go pay for a VP of HR just yet, but you still have a lot of issues that you need to be addressed. So, what are your thoughts on the whole fractional professional universe there?
I think that you hit it right. It was something that people didn't know existed. And there are a lot of different fractional professionals that only support clients of a certain size.
Yeah.
Some people say to me, Luisa, what size is it that you need? How many employees you have to have, support or expertise? We don't discriminate. I think it's at every stage, right? So I have clients that have 5 employees, and that mix of employees, sometimes there's issues. They want to have standard processes, have a professional, make sure that they're maintaining effective practices. Our support with them is flexible, right? So, I have a client that they call me when they need me. They have something to come up, a question, so we're flexible in that sense. Whereas we have others that they need that interim solution, whether it's, once a week, once every other week, twice a week, depending on what it is. Like sometimes we're an interim solutions, other times we're a long-term solution. So we're flexible in supporting our clients. We also like to, if a client doesn't have a budget, you mentioned the budget, a lot of the times we'll identify gaps through an HR assessment, which we can talk about in a minute, but they can try before they buy. They can start with one project. Like a lot of the times I always say with this, a business owner, it's so important to have your employment contracts and policies and practices from not just from a compliance, but from communication is usually the biggest problem, and clarity in terms of roles and responsibility, that relationship, right? So at a minimum, I would say, even if you have 1 employee or 2 employees, you should have those things. And we have different solutions for people that just want to kind of get templates or try those things. And then like we've got an online portal. So whereas we have other solutions where, that's going to be that they need us to support, because there's a lot of, as you have more employees, you have
Yeah.
more a different dynamic, different, different, where we live in a country where it's everyone, there's no set standard in terms of a cultural expectation.
Right.
Everyone's got different standards. So, you need to
Yeah.
blend that and respect
Yeah.
that and try to figure out a path forward when it comes to differences at times and be open to exciting opportunities. So, yes, I think that a fractional solution is ideal to ensure that you're minimizing risk and going about things from a best practice perspective, so that one, you can have a successful business that's got a good reputation, and you're doing your part in supporting the community and having a great, like I said, I'm a big mental health advocate. So,
Yeah.
having a great place to work that people want to go to work, that's important, but it's also going to be very attractive to when you're ready to step away, having these best practices in place. If you're not aware of what they should be, then how do you know the sustainability, the long-term success of that, to
Yeah.
be able to, as a business owner, we're always thinking, well, either what's our end goal here,
Yeah.
right? We're either going to sell our business or transfer it to maybe generational sort of
Yeah.
transfer, right? Sometimes pass it down to your kids, whatever the case
Yeah.
might be. Either way, you want to set things up for success so that it's it's got a long legacy,
Yeah.
and it's doing what it's supposed to do, your business, whether it's, in manufacturing and whatever the industry that's continue to support, your clients, the economy, those types of things. So having those things in place effectively from the start is important, and it can be at a small scale, right?
Yeah. Now, you made an allusion to your assessments. So, talk to us about how you use assessments to help business owners sort of identify gaps and maybe help to close those gaps up.
Yeah. So we have an HR assessment. We've got two different versions. We have an HR assessment. We have an HR assessment light. The assessment is very thorough in the sense that we are able to consider all aspects. So we basically, it's not, I know that audit is a finance term coming from an
Sure.
accounting firm, but it's kind of like an audit. We're
Yeah.
going through practices, processes, documentation. Sometimes people have a vacation policy, but then I go and say, well, how do you practice this? And it's like, well, they don't really follow the policy. So those are really important things. So we review all those aspects. We do leader one-on-one so that we're understanding their style as a leader,
Yeah.
getting the lay of the land of their team, and also, understanding what burning issues they might have that they could need support on. And I guess lastly, what's their experience as a leader? How would they find value in an HR partner, right?
Yeah.
Inevitably, we're also assessing their leadership style,
Yeah.
essentially. So those are the leader one-on-ones, and then I mentioned the audit. So that's the light version.
Right.
The more full version also gets the employees' input, which is really fulsome, right? And so the third aspect of that is having an engagement survey, or a check-in survey, we call it. We
Yeah.
ask key questions around, work policies, leadership, benefits, compensation, performance, roles and responsibility. So we sort of understand, okay, what does it look like from an HR perspective, from the lens of the employee? Oftentimes, though, when people fill out these surveys, they feel that they put people, I find that people put what they think people want to hear,
Yeah.
and they're not always as transparent. So, what we do is, after we've gotten the results of the survey, we host focus groups. They're about a half an hour, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
People that are not going to be in a meeting with their leader, but once someone opens up and shares something,
Hmm.
then everyone feels comfortable. It's a very safe space, but it also gives us some insight as to, okay, where are the lower pieces of where they scored, and the focus is on, okay, this is an issue you've identified. What do you think should be a solution?
Yeah.
It's not to be sort of a complaint department session. We want to hear what are their thoughts. We want to get their input. What are their ideas, right? And oftentimes people just want to be heard. So it's um, a very good system that we have. And once we have all that data,
Yeah.
essentially what we're doing is we're identifying trends, we're gathering the gaps. So we're able to identify gaps, and we go back to we share the results with the executive team, which then they cascade it down to their leadership team. And essentially what we're doing there is, with the gaps, we're identifying a roadmap or an HR strategy, a plan, and prioritizing based on where we're hearing it. One, from a compliance perspective, is important, but if you've got a retention problem and people are going to leave, then let's deal with that first, right?
Yeah.
I had a client once that we did this assessment. We were working with them on a fractional basis as well, and they're like, "We need to put in an RSP match program. We need to put in." I said, "Just wait till the assessment's done so we can understand where the priority should lie." And they had a younger team, a generational group, and all they wanted was a performance review program. They wanted to have feedback. They wanted to grow their careers. They weren't interested in saving for their retirement that they didn't even think about at that point. So, we saved that aspect, and we really focused on, putting in the structure and performance reviews. So it really helps organizations identify where there are gaps, where there's opportunities. Also, it gives them an idea of what the long game looks like. So as I mentioned, through that, we've worked with clients that say, okay, I can't do everything right now, or I can't afford to do that, but I want to do one of the key pieces. Let's prioritize, and we do them on a project. I also think, like I mentioned, that there's a long game, right?
Mm-hmm.
This might identify a lot of gaps. It's not going to happen overnight. You don't want to implement all these things overnight, because then you're just going to create panic with your staff.
Yeah.
Why are we doing all this stuff? Are you going to fire me? Are you looking to sell? So it has to be sort of long term. That's why the planning should start, much earlier if people are looking to sell their business, right? Like if owners are looking to exit, you need to start that process in advance. It's going to take at least a year or two.
Yeah, at least. No, we know key employees are very important to any business. And then if somebody's on the road to an exit, retention of those key employees is very important. So what's your role in that?
Yeah, I think, like I said, it's important to set up those succession plans. It's also important to, demonstrate that value, and perhaps you've got other incentive programs that they're already involved in. If not, then maybe creating some profit sharing programs, or, some incentives for career development, leadership, long-term sort of incentive plans. And so the biggest piece too is that I find that owners, because they're going through this, it's tough. It's tough to keep it all, it's lonely at the top, we say, right? But that's where you work with your fractional support structure, because what happens is, from a communication perspective, that's where pieces can go sideways. So, they don't need to announce every detail early. They have to be honest, for sure, to reduce uncertainty, but certain details are not key to, it's the timing is really, really important. They have to build trust, right? So, but silence creates this sort of anxiety. So having sort of transparency in certain key milestones definitely is important, but also having one-on-ones that's not going to, provide so much detail, but to identify those critical employees, let them know what their role is, and setting up those sort of success. Maybe it's a completion bonus, or, focus on retention and what is their role going to look. They want to know, what does it mean to me, right?
Yes.
If you say to them, nothing is going to change, you're the future, that's important to make sure that's demonstrated, that's put in writing. Those things are set up way in advance. Or, let's say that they're part of that transition, and we want to keep them to the end of that transition period. Well, then you need to set up some compensation programs that's going to drive that performance and those results that you're looking for.
Yeah. So you've done a lot of work with family businesses, and we know the family businesses are very, very complicated for a number of different reasons. So, if you're a family business where you got multiple people, multiple family members involved with the business, but they're thinking about maybe a prospective exit. Talk to us about some of the HR issues that crop up.
Yeah, so families are dysfunctional, right? And so it's no different in a business where there's going to be that dysfunction. But it's really, I would say, we work with a lot of family businesses, and I commend a lot of the clients that we work with because they work so well together. And it's because they've got clear strengths and complexities, definitely, but their their pieces, they have boundaries. Like there's clear roles and responsibilities.
Mhm.
They separate family issues from business issues. Like they're not, that they make sure that the for lack of a better term, the kids don't know the problems that the parents are having, right? Like we keep those things separate, and it's really, really important. It can seep in. So, what's important is like, you have a reporting structure where you're not reporting to your family member. Make sure you've got people that are in that business that are going to have a non-biased opinion. When there's conflict, within family, make sure you pull it out of the business. It can be a risk to the business, right? In terms of, employee toxicity in the workplace, those types of things, right? Have accountability. Make sure that people are accountable regardless, in those overlapping roles, make sure we've got clear definitions. So having sort of, the documentation, roles and responsibilities, objective criteria, and, reporting lines very, very clear. It's going to make sure that that stability is in place for your buyer, right?
Yeah.
Because let's say that they decide to buy your business and you've got your family in the business. Well, maybe they want to continue to work in that business, but they don't want to own it. Having those clear roles, responsibilities, job descriptions, success documented, and it's going to be key to their long-term sustainability and contributing to that business as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to, and a lot of the times, like we're brought into businesses to have that independent perspective because, you know, the owner's wife is HR. Well, no one's talking to her. Like, right? So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, sometimes, or, I can't performance manage my cousin, but really, like, we kind of go in with that approach and say, okay, let's change these reporting relationships. We'll support you through these discussions. Let's create that system so that it's sustainable long term.
Yeah. So one final question, maybe not always exciting, but why are things like having some policies, having employment contracts, job descriptions, having that documentation related to HR? Why is that so important if you're thinking about having a transferable business?
Yes, it's a really good point you raised. Documentation is key. If it's not documented, it didn't happen, essentially.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is for a business owner that's looking to buy a business, they're going to want to see those relationships or those commitments that you've made. If they're not there, then they didn't exist, which then, could create issues if it's not documented, if, in terms of employee claims, and it could really sink a business, right? In that
Yeah.
sense. So, it also is important from a success maintenance perspective, having clearly documented job descriptions, employment contracts, policies, performance reviews, making sure that those things are in place, that they'll continue and be
Mhm.
maintained. It creates clarity, even in a simple conversation. I'm going to have a conversation with you. We follow up with an email because what we've talked about, maybe it's wasn't like we've talked about so many things. So it creates clarity and helps people know, okay, what's the path forward? So
Yeah.
having those pieces in place is just going to be it's going to define sort of long-term success. And it also is going to ensure that, without that documentation, like I said, it doesn't, I'll give you an example. I had a friend, her family owned a business and she had gone on mat leave with her third child. When
Yeah.
she was coming back, the business was not in their peak season. She couldn't find childcare. So they mutually decided that, okay, come back a few months later when it's busy, gives you some time to find childcare. Well, the business eventually was bought out by a large organization, a public company. Because there was no employment contract, no record of these conversations, no memos say whatever the case might be, they essentially got it that her employment ended and she was rehired. So she lost all her seniority,
Yeah.
vacation was minimized. So, a lot of the times, business owners, a lot of the things that, one of the pieces that they have a hard time selling a business is they want to make sure that their people are taken care of, make sure that they've got that sustainability for their work family.
Mhm.
This is a really important part of that, not just for ensuring that you're identifying risk having sustainable sort of success for your new buyer, but it's also sustainable success for the legacy of the team and the work family that you've left behind to make sure it'll continue. So I would say those are really key pieces for documentation for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Luisa, for joining us today. This has been a great conversation. And for everyone out there, I hope you enjoyed it as well. So thanks for joining us. You're going to have some information on how to contact Luisa below, so you can check that out. And catch us on the next episode of the Expert Interview Series. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you.
That concludes this episode of the Expert Series from Selling Your Canadian Business. This conversation is for educational purposes only and is not professional advice. Always consult qualified professionals. Click on any of the additional resources on screen or visit sellingyourcanadianbusiness.ca. Thank you for joining us.